The Italian Civil War was the conflict that bursted immediately after the Italian surrender to Allied forces and subsequent occupation of the Italian peninsula by Nazi Germany during the Second World War. The Italian Civil War is a side conflict that occurred during the biggest war in history, so it is often overlooked as just being the Allied invasion of Italy. In reality, it was one of the most brutal fronts of the whole conflict. The north and central parts of Italy were occupied by German forces, as the Allies slowly occupied the whole peninsula, often getting stuck for months in the same front lines. Major ones being the Gustav and Green Lines. The fighting, however, didn't stop in the front lines. In German-occupied territories of the north, partisan and communist groups created underground resistance to fight for the liberation of the territory, while many Italian nationals continued to support and fight for the Italian Social Republic under the government of Mussolini, even if in reality it was merely a puppet for Germany to keep control of the Italian peninsula. Under his leadership, thousands of cities and villages were raided and burned down by the Germans, with thousands of innocent civilians dying, either to take revenge or for suspicion of partisan groups plotting against the Nazi fascist control. The Nazis committed countless war crimes involving massacres against the Italian people. Around 200,000 German troops were deployed in Italy at the time of surrender, and Germany kept bringing men until the collapse of the front, all to benefit the Nazi war machine in Europe. As an Italian myself, this is obviously very tragic to hear. So today we are gonna use our imagination to create a better history. I didn't want a boring scenario where Italy immediately switches sides and doesn't get destroyed from the inside. So instead, we are gonna reuse the role of Mussolini and his government to create a different ending for Italy. Germany still needs to lose. This is no Axis victory.
Possiamo parlare con un sovrano disprezzo. Talune dottrine d'altralbe di gente che ignorava la scrittura con la quale tramandare i documenti della propria vita in un tempo in cui Roma aveva Cesare, Virgilio ed Augusto. È un privilegio che vi impone dei particolari doveri. Noi fummo! Grandi quando dominammo il mare. Roma non poté arrivare all'impero prima di aver schiacciato la potenza marittima di Cartagine.
First of all, we need a bit of setup for the scenario. The date is June 1943. The war and everything plays out the same as in real life until this point. This is because a month later Mussolini will get deposed and arrested. Instead, we actually need him in the government. So we need the Fascist Grand Council to rethink about the decision of kicking him out of power. Removing Mussolini would obviously mean inevitable conflict with Nazi Germany, as Mussolini was like the only reason Berlin decided to align with the country. After all the military and political failures of the fascist government, Italian morale is literally down the drain, and no one is willing to fight. Unfortunately for the king and the Grand Council, Mussolini is the only person that can keep the government somewhat stable. So removing his position must be out of question. Now the Allies are about to invade Sicily, and possibly the Italian mainland. Allied forces have been bombing Italian facilities for a while now, in preparation for the Churchill plan to invade Europe's soft belly. But with the muddy season coming, and Mussolini still in charge, the Allies need to rethink their moves. Invading Italy will mean another front for Germany to deal with, obviously. But the Italian peninsula is the core territory of one of the Axis powers. Hundreds of thousands of Nazi troops are stationed there, and the territory is not suited for a blown-out confrontation. For the Allies, opening a full front in Italy will mean getting stuck thousands and thousands of troops in an hostile environment, unable to complete the mission of getting rid of the German hegemony in the region. The Allies invade Sicily, but without the support of Pietro Badoglio's government, they hesitate on opening the front. For now, the Allies can only keep bombing Italian facilities and send military expeditions on main Italian ports to secure the position on the south. It has come to a very critical point for Italy. Mussolini has to make a choice: keep fighting and slowly lose men and resources, or admit Germany has become the real enemy and join the Allied side. Most in the government at this point will have already switched side. The pressure is at the roof, and so Mussolini decides that the best course of action for the country is to join the Allied side. The Allies will much appreciate Italy's support, as they wouldn't be fighting on enemy territory anymore. In our timeline, the Fascist high command and their war crimes were pardoned, as they collaborated with the Allies. So in this timeline, the Allies will spare Mussolini and his government, or punishing him could be a backlash for their reputation. So Mussolini signs a secret armistice with the Allies. Later, a speech is given to officially announce the armistice, and the Italian army suddenly turns on the Germans, who are still deployed in the country. The high command in Berlin had this coming, so they were prepared to occupy the Italian railway system and seize most of the country. The fascist high command remains in charge of the army, so unlike in real life, the whole country doesn't collapse on its own. The Italian army is weak, but they managed to secure Rome and most of Tuscany. The north is seized by the German army. Many Nazi-fascist loyalists remain on the German side. However, most of the occupation remains of Nazi suppression. Partisan activity immediately begins. The result of the timeline we just created might be very similar to real life, but with Mussolini still in charge and the Italian army still intact, the fighting doesn't go as horribly as it could have. The Allies speed charge into the core of the peninsula, but the Germans are still fighting harshly, bringing devastation and terror in occupied territories. At this stage, Mussolini obviously has lost most of his autonomy, as now the new people in command are obviously the Allies. However, this doesn't actually change much for his power. With the Nazis, he had to comply and do as the Germans told. The dynamic didn't change, only the ones in charge did. Mussolini's reputation, however, definitely took hits. Once considered an Iron Man, capable and confident of his actions, has just betrayed his closest ally and is treated like a side character by his new allies. His public image is irreversibly corrupted. But still, now that the Commonwealth and the USA have a new ally in Italy, it makes the liberation of the peninsula go faster than in real life. Italian support among the population was already weak for the fascists, so the arrival of allied troops in the territories is welcomed by the locals. Meanwhile, Operation Overlord is occurring, and with that the Germans will have to switch their focus into France, which is falling apart just like the front in Italy, which is becoming harder and harder to manage. Germany have their hands tied. The end is near. With the end of the war, the fate of Mussolini's regime will be decided. The alignment with the Allies makes the fascist regime fall under the category of collaborationist government, meaning they have great advantage over how their crimes are gonna be charged. For reference, in real life, since the previous fascist government decided to eventually help the Allies, Italy never had an official trial court like Nuremberg for Germany. Italian war crimes were basically overlooked and never brought up for charge, meaning that in our scenario, Mussolini would probably be spared by the death penalty, and his government pardoned. Being on the winning side often gets you a lot of benefits. Unlike the Soviet Union, the countries occupied by the Western Allies would eventually become the most wealthy nations of the world during the Cold War. Italy is no different. Being on the Allied side for 2 years, they benefit from having been loyal to the winning side for quite a while. You don't even have to join the Allies to benefit. Japan, being the most brutal enemy of the United States, will still prosper thanks to the American economy after the war. Even their leader Hirohito will be spared. Unlike World War I, this time the Allies focus on rebuilding and making allies, because the communist threat is very concerning. Another important point is that Francisco Franco, despite being a fascist dictator, was spared from any Western intervention, and even then he would eventually become an even closer ally during Eisenhower's presidency, meaning that the Allies will give priority to making sure communism would spread in the West rather than liberating the people from oppression. Mussolini obviously ruled as a ruthless dictator, often getting rid of the opposition while ruling with terror. His manners would obviously be forced to change, just like Japan. Many policies like the censorship of the press or the Jewish segregation would stop. The economy wouldn't change much, as his government would be forced to collaborate with the West. The partisans that fought in the war would be cast aside, as most of them believed in extremist socialism or communist ideals, and the Allies can't afford to give more political space to their enemy ideology. Communist revolutionaries and other movements would erupt during the Cold War, just like in real life. However, this situation raises a question: would Italy still get an election to decide to either keep the monarchy or become a republic? Despite the Italian people being done with Mussolini, the Allies will probably have kept his position in the government. Remember that in 1945 Mussolini was 61 years old, and the king was 78 years old. So until one of these two figures dies, we can assume they will keep a government of convenience. And that was basically it for what if fascists won the civil war. Italy would look pretty different if Mussolini was kept in power, even if his decisions would have meant much less than when he was in his prime. Italy still looks very different. I originally planned to make Mussolini not align with the Allies, but after a few calculations I concluded that winning on their own was literally impossible.
Le bombe all'Orsini, il pugnale alla mano, a morte l'austriaco sovrano, e noi vogliamo la libertà. Morte a Franz, viva Verdun, morte a Franz, viva Verdun.